NieR Replicant is an upgraded version of the 2010 action RPG NieR, which was originally released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The series has gained more attention due to the popularity of NieR Automata, but now the original NieR has received an overhaul and is returning as NieR Replicant version 1.224, which is based on a version of the game that previously never released in the West. NieR Replicant tells the story of a young man that is trying to save his younger sister Yonah, who is overcome with a deadly illness known as the Black Scrawl. The game starts off with the protagonist and Yonah hiding in an abandoned building, while trying to avoid enemies known as Shades. The Shades manage to find them hiding in the building, and the protagonist steps in to defend Yonah. This is what leads into the tutorial for the game and introduces the basic gameplay mechanics. Once the tutorial is over, the game continues 1,412 years later, with Yonah and the protagonist living in a small stone house. This introduction to the game may seem a bit strange, and my explanation of it is intentionally vague, but there is a lot that becomes clear once you continue playing through the game. What the Drakengard and NieR games do really well is present you with a basic understandable story that you can play through until the credits, but there are major truths that are presented if you continue to play past the initial ending of the game. Things that you thought you figured out on your first playthrough can be completely flipped on their head, and situations that you thought you understood can end up having a completely different meaning. The unique way the story progresses in this game is reinforced by well-written characters and some very high-quality voice acting. You can play this game with the Japanese audio, and that's something I often do with Japanese games that have the option, but I'd highly recommend the English voices for this game. I think the English voice actors did a great job of bringing the characters to life, and unless you're fluent in Japanese, you may miss out on some of the conversations between the characters that take place during gameplay, especially the conversations between Kaine and Grimoire Weiss. Throughout the game, you'll travel to different locations while searching for a cure for Yonah. Your journey will take you to different towns where you'll be able to visit the various shops to buy materials, equipment, and items. You can also meet people that will have quests that give you various rewards, or unlock new features like a mount that will let you travel through areas faster, and side activities like gardening and fishing. It is possible for a lot of quests to become uncompletable if you move too far forward with the main story. The game is pretty unforgiving in this regard, since it won't warn you if you're about to move past a point of no return. So if you're a completionist, I would recommend finishing any quest that you come across before moving on with the main story. There are a few additions to this version of NieR that still make it worth playing for someone that's already seen everything that the original had to offer. The most obvious being the new perspective of the main character. After playing NieR Gestalt in the past, I didn't think I would like Replicant's younger protagonist, but I actually think he fits in pretty well. It does feel like the additional voiced lines in this version help give him much more personality, and it feels like time has much more of an impact on this protagonist and his growth as the story progresses. So overall, it does feel like he is a better fit for the main character. Content-wise, all the DLC that was in the original game is included in Replicant, and a new storyline quest was integrated into the main story, as well as a completely new additional ending to the game. But I have to say, even though the main characters and bosses did get a visual overhaul, the environments and non-important NPCs still look fairly dated. It's not something that takes away from the overall experience, but it may be something that you will notice when running around in the world, or when you see the quality difference between your character and an NPC when they're side by side. But despite that, I think that this version of NieR is vastly superior to the original. One of the biggest changes being the enhancements to the combat. The gameplay can be hectic at times, and with some enemies it can feel like you're playing a bullet hell game, but the core of the combat is still the same as the original. What did change was the pace of the combat, which is much faster now, and you have much more mobility when it comes to evading and moving around in battles. The animations also seem to have been completely redone, so combat feels much smoother and more satisfying. It's possible to just mash buttons and get through most fights, and since this game doesn't make all of the gameplay mechanics obvious, some people may not notice that there's more to the combat than there first appears to be. But if you take advantage of the combat system and its mechanics, you're less likely to be overwhelmed by the swarms of enemies you'll often need to fight. To start off with, you'll only have access to one-handed swords, but as you progress further into the game, you will unlock the spear and greatsword weapon types. There are multiple weapons within these categories for you to find and choose from, and you can freely switch between these weapons when using your primary and secondary attacks to create combos. And if you hold down an attack button during or before a combo, you'll perform a charged attack that is usually more powerful and can throw the enemy off balance. Throughout the game, you'll gain access to different types of magic that have various uses, like giving you the ability to shoot at enemies, or creating multiple clones of yourself that attack any enemies that are nearby. You can also use magic to summon spinning blades that circle around your character, or even create a wave of spears that impales enemies and disables them for a few seconds. Just like with normal attacks, each magical ability can be charged down by holding its assigned button, which will increase its effectiveness. You can even charge magic while attacking with your weapons, and then release the magic mid-combo to add a charged magic attack to your combo chain. You can evade attacks from enemies by pressing the evade button, and if you keep moving in a direction while evading, you'll start sprinting after the roll, which will make it easier for you to get out of danger quickly. But it's also possible for you to sidestep an enemy if you press the evade button while moving towards them. This will let you quickly slide behind the enemy and perform a special sidestep attack while they're vulnerable. Holding down the guard button will let you block enemy attacks, and you can also deflect attacks when pushing the block button just as the enemy is about to hit you. This will knock the enemy back and give you a chance to counterattack while they're off balance. You can also use finishers to quickly kill a downed enemy. There's no obvious indicator showing that an enemy is ready for a finisher, so you'll need to pay attention and use the finishing attack, which is the circle button on PlayStation, when standing next to an enemy while they're downed. As you progress further into the game, other characters will join your party and fight alongside you. You won't be able to control or customize these characters outside of a few basic commands, but they will help distract other enemies so you're not overwhelmed when fighting a large group. Your weapons, magic, and defensive abilities can also be enhanced through the use of words that can be found when defeating enemies. You can freely change the words that you have attached to your equipment in the menu, and when active, the words will give you various enhancements like increased attack, lower MP consumption, or even adding a status effect onto your weapons. It's also possible to upgrade your weapons by gathering materials and bringing them to a specific character. Upgrading weapons will increase their power and unlock a weapon-specific story. As you continue to upgrade the weapon, more of the story is revealed. In most games, I tend to ignore the flavor text on equipment, but in the NieR games, I actually go out of my way to read the weapon stories, since they're usually interesting to read and the origins of each weapon is often very dark and disturbing. I wish I could go into more detail about the story in the world, but it's just something that you need to experience for yourselves, since saying too much will just spoil things for you. But if you enjoyed the original release, or if you played NieR Automata, or if you just like action RPGs, then this game is worth playing. The combat may be fairly simple compared to other action games, but it's still very enjoyable and it feels satisfying to mow down loads of enemies and dodge waves of bullets. Back in 2010, one of the main criticisms for the original game was that the shallow combat and the performance were holding it back. It had a lot of interesting gameplay ideas, and the story touched on themes that were rarely covered. But now with NieR Replicant, we get to see what this game has to offer at its full potential, and it's definitely something that shouldn't be missed. I post smaller gameplay clips and news updates over on Twitter between the videos that I make. So if you want to stay up to date with everything I'm doing, I'll put the links to Twitter and a few other places you can find me in the description. So if you want to see any of my other gameplay videos that I make for action games and RPGs, then don't forget to subscribe and remember to click the bell so you'll be the first to know when a new video is available. I'll be making some new videos very soon, but until I make those videos, I'll see you all later.